My Lord, I particularly am interested in the student visa amendments, and I think they're both very helpful. There is certainly an informal assessment, there is an informal assumption now that there is a problem of some overseas students playing the system and potentially using their student visas as a mechanism for seeking asylum. But I think that the noble lady, Baroness Lawler, presented a balanced and sensitive case for us all understanding, first of all, the importance of overseas students in the UK, and secondly, the legitimate use of asylum seeking if circumstances change, but whilst at the same time understanding that there is a potential abuse of the system that we should be aware of. And the problem is, of course, that whereas there is a kind of focus on something like small boats, maybe a focus on universities doesn't feel as though that's quite as newsworthy, or headlines won't be generated by it, or it seems somehow more legitimate if you've come to do even a media studies course. I mean, you know, it feels like as though they can't be criminals. But nonetheless, there is a problem if the system is abused. And one of the things that I think two of the additional points to make that maybe have not been referred to, is that I do fear that UK universities themselves have missold universities to overseas students. I mean, treating university courses as as cash cows for overseas students. And one of my first more militant acts at university many decades ago was a week-long sit-in in defence of overseas students from increased fees, and I've always thought that was an important part of our education system to defend overseas students. But when in fact universities simply for money sell courses, often to students, inappropriate courses, often to students, by the way, who are not able to speak English in any way that would be adequate for a degree, and that's not criticising them. I'm criticising the university managements who see universities or their own courses and sell them in that way. That kind of cynicism is likely to rub off then on students who will not necessarily come here and think, I must take seriously my duties and responsibilities to higher education in the pursuit of knowledge, because the universities that have recruited them have done in an entirely instrumental business-like fashion, sold them a course that's maybe not very good and not take any notice of their educational facility. Why wouldn't you become cynical in those circumstances? And then that finally gets me to that last point, which is I would hope that the government would take the opportunity of both of these amendments, indeed, to think about universities and overseas students, because this is very much in the news when we consider the issues and the context of Sheffield Hallam University, where we now know that Sheffield Hallam University management betrayed one of its own academics, compromised academic freedom in order to guarantee a continued flow of Chinese overseas students, and therefore stopped the research of an academic because the Chinese state found it inconvenient. It is not in any of our interests to allow universities to become politicised instruments of overseas students in a political way, whether that's the states using them in a particular way, or indeed those people who recommend to students, and I know that this happens, if you go and study in the UK on one of these courses in one of these universities, you'll easily get asylum. It's a form of people trafficking that's just not hitting the headlines, but I can assure you it's what's happening. Yeah. So I support both amendments, and I was very pleased to see them.
Yeah.
My Lords, as you know, I've always sat in a lot of these debates and never stood up to speak, but I feel compelled that I must actually speak today. First of all, I want to declare an interest that I was Chancellor of two universities, York St. John and University of Carlisle, for well over 12 years. And we had a lot of overseas students, and I'm not sure, or I'm not actually persuaded, but what I'm hearing, it is very easy to cast aspersions when you're not within the actual university itself. I think most of our universities do a fantastic job in registering employment, registering people who really want to study here. I mean, in York St. John as well as Carlisle University, they had training centers in China. So people, before they got here, they had a good command of English, and all I know is that all those students in those years actually did go back, unless they remained to do some research, which was again allowed. So please let us not have these general statements about universities that they're all of the same. You really...
I would just want to clarify, in case there was any confusion, that I have worked with and have great admiration for many Chinese students in this country. It was not an attempt at in any way smearing them. That is not to say that there is not an abuse of the system in some instances, and this was a query that we should be attentive to that, because it betrays the students when they're not given proper education in this country and are used in a particular way for political ends. It doesn't mean all Chinese students are doing that at all.